Welcome to Object 26 of 100 objects that tell the history and philosophy of Summerhill School. Object 26 is, I'll just pick it up if I can get it up, is flowers. And we're going to look at flowers. So just imagine I'm a little girl and I was surrounded by my classmates in a school in Little Something in England, and my teacher's called Harriet Finley Johnson, and it's just before the 1900s, and she's taken us for a lovely walk through the woods near the school, the village school, and we've been picking flowers and collecting objects as you would in your child-centred progressive primary school. And you'd have a little girl and she's holding up the flower and the teacher's encouraging the other children to ask her questions about the flower, to ask the student who's holding the flower questions. And the student would have done some research or chatted to the teacher about the flower, and they'd ask questions like, "Oh, what colour are you?" "Oh, I'm yellow." And why do you think you're yellow? And the girl might say, "Oh, I think I'm yellow because it's attractive to bees and butterflies and insects." And then I say, "Well, yes, but why is a flower useful to bees, butterflies and insects?" "Oh, because they collect pollen and nectar, which is useful for their food. They get it for their food." So we have the little girl being interviewed as the flower. In fact, Harriet Finley Johnson sort of created a whole curriculum around the walks and science and collected the children collecting and learning about their environment through science. But then she realised that through one of the, I think one of the boys, maybe one of the children, they did like a play, and then she started realising that drama was the thing, so she then changed the way she taught so that she used drama, and drama would include possibly role-playing what a flower thinks about being interviewed. Okay, so that's Harriet Finley Johnson. She was the hero of the person who was then Chief Inspector of all schools, who wrote a book based on and inspired by her work, and she was a teacher who also sort of inspired this Chief Inspector of Schools and others to set up and celebrate Montessori through a conference in 1914 in East Runton in Norfolk. And that conference went on to become the New Ideals in Education the following year, and it celebrated Harriet Finley Johnson's work. And Harriet Finley Johnson was even sort of invited by her local county education group to share her work with other teachers, other primary school teachers. She was head of the primary school. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is read from a book that is called Gardens in Their Seasons, and it was given to my father when he was a young child by my auntie Betty in Christmas 1937. My auntie became a wonderful biology teacher and was totally dedicated to natural sciences and gardens and nature, and she helped set up a school farm within a state school. Anyway, this is Gardens in Their Seasons by C. von Weiss, and it was published in 1912, and it starts with this lovely story. There were once some boys and girls who lived in the middle of the city in tall houses that faced narrow streets. They were all about 9 years old, and they very much wanted to have gardens. There was no room for gardens around the houses in which they lived, as these stood so close together that they touched each other. And at the back were mews, warehouses and paved yards, where it was only possible to play at having a garden. And then it goes on. All at once, the children had a lovely idea. They each got a little wooden box. Some of the boxes were given to them, and some they bought from confectioners and cigar dealers. Most of the boxes were weak and beginning to split at the corners, so they had to be mended. The children prepared little strips of wood from some of the lids and nailed them upright along the corners of the boxes. The boxes did not look quite pretty enough to be gardens because they had names and other marks all printed over them. Remembering how the gates and railings of a local square were painted from time to time, the children decided to paint their garden walls, the wooden boxes. Some of them chose a bright scarlet colour and others blue. One boy decided to have green, and this seemed so new and so good an idea that some of the other children chose green too. They painted the four sides first, and then, while they were about it, the bottom also. The boxes were then filled with earth. So it tells the story of these city children creating their own box gardens and then planting them, and then the whole book goes through the whole year of spring, summer, autumn and winter and the seasons, and what the children do and how the plants grow. It's a lovely, lovely book. That was early 1900s, and it reflects the whole sense of the importance of children and learning how to grow things and having a relationship with the countryside, even if they're in the city, and having a connection with the beauty of flowers. And there goes my flower. Which is also reflected in East London with Margaret Macmillan, who set up a primary school in East London. She set up one of the first schools with a nurse and with a health centre. Really, she believed in the health of the children, and this was in sort of industrial, impoverished East London, and she ensured that the children were surrounded by gardens and by flowers that they would plant in the gardens to ensure that the children would grow up within nursery children and primary school children would grow up surrounded by beauty and would be able to appreciate it. Same with Clara Grant, the famous East London primary school head, that she wanted to surround the children with flowers and plants and beauty. And again, the same with the Leicester sisters, who set up Kingsley Hall, which was a settlement, and also set up the Children's House in Bow, which was a nursery school based on Maria Montessori's work, and which had sort of gardens in pots and containers and things. So flowers were very, very, very important, and there's a report published, I think, about the London County Council responding to the 1918 Education Act. I think the report was published about 1920, well, it's written in about 1921 or beginning of the 1920s, but it reflects on how well the LCC, the London County Council, be implementing the 1918 Act. And part of it says about the over 5 million plants had been donated to schools during the year from the local government nurseries, from the greenhouses that are owned and run by the local government, and they said that there were at least something like 400 schools a year were being given gardens. That every new school was built with a garden, and that old schools were they were ensuring that gardens were to open old schools. So there was an incredible emphasis on our primary school children in the City of London actually being able to enjoy gardens and to use those gardens as part of their learning. So, in terms of Summerhill, when I arrived at Summerhill, there was a wonderful teacher who taught woodwork, and he taught rural science as well, and the children would have their own little allotments where they could grow vegetables and flowers, and they would have cloches, and they would have they would do experiments, so that some of the plants they would sow in their plots without any covering, and others they would have to cover and protect with see-through plastic, and then see how the different vegetables would grow and things, and they would do. They used, in fact, the teacher used what was the Jazz Cafe. he used that as a classroom to teach this rural science. So they were learning about being farming, and it wasn't just about plants and flowers, it was also about farm animals and things. So sadly that was stopped, partly because I think the rural science syllabus was changed, and also sadly the woodwork syllabus, they all became more to do with, well, the woodwork became sort of craft design technology stuff. And then this, also while I was there, I mean, the class 1 would have its own gardens. The SAN and the SAN House Parent would create gardens. I think the individual staff would have their own gardens, and the children might help with those. And there would be ponds in the gardens as well. And then the children could, there was a garden project, in fact, which was helped by a local college, and one of our maths teachers who had links with the college sort of got them to design a garden, and then that spread, and different children had different flower beds and things, and it's an ongoing thing. It's growing flowers and seeing them pop up in the spring, and the colours, and I did experiments, in fact, with class 1 as their science teacher. We put up a different coloured card, blue card and red card and yellow card, and sort of pin them to the plants, and then see which colour would attract different insects. Because we were looking at the insects, and at the time there were loads of little beetles and pollen beetles, and we wanted to see what colour was the best colour for a flower in terms of this particular insect. I just want to end with flowers, and I mean the sunflower is a lovely image in terms of friendship and welcoming. And there's a lovely story in Dominic's log, as there always is, which links in fact to that book on gardening through the plants through the year. This is, I wonder how much influence on observation the so-called nature study has. At one time I attended a Saturday class. We went botanising, and then he tells a story about him falling in love with a little girl, with one of the girls similar age to him. I got up my scanty nature study from Grant Allen's. Grant Allen's is a wonderful set of books on nature study. Little Shilling book on plants. It was a delightful book, full of an almost Yankee imagination. It theorised all the way. Grass developed a long narrow blade so it might edge its way to the sun. While tobacco has a broad blade because it doesn't need to care twopence for the competition of other plants. It could grow on wet clay of railway bankings. I think now that Grant Allen was a romancer, not a scientist. So the stories he told were like Rudyard Kipling stories about why things are as they are. I do not see the point in asking Bairns children to count the stamens of a buttercup. Dr. Johnson hated the poets who count the streaks of the tulip. But I do not want to make them Grant Allens. I want them to make a theory. Native study has but little result unless Burns get a lead. No boy will guess that the lines of a petal are intended to lead bees to the honey. At least I know I never would have guessed it. I should never guess that flowers are beautiful or perfumed in order to attract insects. But I'm really no criterion. I could not tell at this moment the colour of my bedroom wallpaper. So he thinks, Neil thinks that getting the children to think about why things are as they are, and getting them to have questions then, and then like the question which flower would be the best colour for the beetle, and then doing experiment to test that and things like that, which I'll tell other stories on other tricks about follow-up questions to get the kids thinking about why. But so the flower. And flowers are a major aspect of the history of Summerhill, in terms of growing them, in terms of appreciating them, in terms, in fact, of the art of drawing them and painting them and taking pictures of them, and in terms of the image of the modern school, of primary schools, and the importance of the children being surrounded by plants and flowers, but also in terms of the children growing them and learning from them growing Thank you. That is object 26, the flower.